Hey everybody, Kelly Justice here with the Philosophy Society. It's June 26th. It's a Wednesday. We're in the Toronto Metropolitan University Library, room 860, I think. And yeah, we got people in the room, people online, people YouTube later. So basically for the new people here, the Philosophy Society, so philosophy is defined as the love of wisdom, right? Philosophia.
Philosophy.
And traditionally, it's been isolated to the university. Like if you're going to study philosophy, the only real place is in some school, and it's professed primarily in universities, right? And the type of philosophy, when we look at epistemology, like the study of knowledge, there's semantic knowledge, which is like facts, like when we know things or our beliefs. And then there's like knowing how to do something, right? Like demonstrative knowledge or like going through the motions of things. And so learning how to ride a bike is an example of that. Like a kid may not be able to write an essay on the physics of bicycle riding, but they can do it relatively well, right? Mm-hmm. And so well-being in some ways is making sense of your beliefs and understanding the way we think about things, or as Sellers said, how everything hangs together in the greatest possible sense. But wisdom is not necessarily limited to making sense of our beliefs or perennial philosophical questions like we just went through the existence of God, for example, right? So you guys can watch those videos on YouTube later, last week and the week before. And so wisdom is generally defined as like the quality and soundness of our decisions, actions, experience, judgments, and also we could add to it what we think, like being reasonable, right? So if someone just spouted out gibberish and it didn't make any sense, you wouldn't really say that person's wise. You know, it'd be more on the lines of foolishness or mental illness for them. And so how we live our lives, right, going back to that knowledge principle, is in some ways intimately tied with wisdom. And it's important for us to have a good life. And so Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics discusses the meaning of a good life, or in the Eumedian Ethics. And for him, it's being virtuous, a life of contemplation and being a virtuous person. And so to add to that, positive psychology and clinical psychology kind of looks at like the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders and certain principles of positive psychology like subjective well-being. And we can derive properties of well-being or wellness from that and integrate it into how we live our lives. So the Philosophy Society is fundamentally like practical philosophy, like what is the best way to live? And religion has kind of taken that by the horns and has been riding that bull for a long, long time. And part of the problem is there's a disconnect between knowledge, what we know, and what we believe, which is this other psychological property of faith. People just have faith, they're like, no questions, this is what I do, you're not allowed to ask me anything. And that's kind of the way that's been going for a long time. Yep.
You mentioned about very important. You said wisdom is about the quality of the thought. How do you measure quality of the thought? Why some thought is high quality? What do you mean by quality?
So like Aristotle would say that we have like laws of thought, like the law of non-contradiction or the law of identity. And so if I say that the square is the circle, the quality of that thought would be low because it's in some ways contradicting itself, right? Other ways, like, you know, there's like modes of processing, like psychologically, and certain modes of processing are how we derive to certain ways of being or modes of thinking, we could say are of lower quality because, again, they may not make sense, like in delusional thinking or like if someone's hallucinating stuff, or in depressive ways of thinking, like if we don't feel good and our emotions are representative of the way we look at the world or how we're telling ourselves things, or our inability to structure our lives with healthy habits, right? So the Philosophy Society is really a wise group is how I'm defining it. We can have groups of people that talk about the history of philosophy, like you said earlier. Is it a requirement for me to have studied philosophy? Not at all. This group is complementary to studying philosophy in university, but they're not mutually exclusive. I encourage people to study certain courses. You know, I think at least certain, like a good 6 to 8 is important for well-being across the board. It's understanding how humans came to think the way we do, like up to the Enlightenment and then to present day, right? And then, so a wise group, to say that you're wise would mean, or that you follow certain principles, would mean that you don't make certain errors, right? And now that we have some science and psychology looking at individuals and groups, we can see some of the errors that humans make in the way that groups are structured or just in how we live our lives. And those would be like cognitive or social biases. And so one social bias is like groupthink, right? In a certain group context, the norms and values of the group can be structured in such a way that it doesn't allow feedback or dissenting from the popular view. And so if you notice that there's something going on that's wrong, people will shun you from the group or remove you if you have a disagreeing proposition or belief, right? And we've seen with the Challenger space shuttle that there was a problem with the O-rings and the spaceship blew up, and the engineers knew that that was going to occur, but the way that the hierarchy was structured and their inability to accept certain contrary information, they didn't integrate that feedback, and then there was a problem, right? So that's just one example. There's other examples like within conformity and appeals to authority, problems of prejudice and racism and these kinds of things. We want to make sure that we don't have those as elements within social groups because it just reduces our well-being and it takes humanity away from us, right? And so
is this something to do with the there's the CBT cognitive?
Yep.
Is it something related to the CBT?
Yeah. So those were social things, and on an individual level, our personal well-being. When we look at like the principles of CBT and how cognitive behavioral therapy, like what the philosophy of it is, it's basically like the way we think about things can either promote our well-being or take away from our well-being. And they're almost like critical thinking errors or logical errors that are related to our self-esteem or our motivation. And so if we can be aware of the way we're thinking about things, then we can structure our beliefs in a healthier way. And then we're less likely to be depressed, for example, right? Still, I think if you need to have therapy, go get therapy, like go talk to somebody who's a professional and do that. But if we can take care of a lot of it ourselves, just in the norms of the group, all groups have norms, right? In religious groups, it's like, be faithful, worship God. This is how you do it. If you deviate too much in some groups, they'll kill you. I mean, I don't think that's a good idea, personally, right? I believe in human rights. I believe in equality. And some governments will throw you in prison if you disagree, like Putin, right? And currently in Russia, the Russian people are under the reign of a tyrant. Not cool, right? That kind of worship towards an individual is not acceptable. That's a problem with appealing to authority. You want to be able to speak freely, right? And then criticize those beliefs to make sure that any quality beliefs that we have or things we think come out, and then we can utilize them as a social group, right?
Okay. Is it a bad?
Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. And so some things, so I have a larger conception of how as an educational institution would work. This group is more about, right now we're going through a specific book, but sometimes I talk about the general philosophy of well-being and mental health. And so all of last year, I basically went through that. So you guys can listen to it like a podcast and whatever, there's 50 videos there, quite a bit. And then if you have any ideas, like, Achilles, what is this? And then I'll be like, okay, let's understand it. And that's the practice of philosophizing, right? Like if philosophy is a verb, philosophizing, what does that mean? And let's work through that, right? We want to just remove ourselves. Like I look at some students in philosophy and I question whether or not they have a graduate degree in wisdom or if they just became more arrogant and disagreeable. And I'm like, I don't know, like, it's like, that, I don't know if it's a good thing, what's being taught. I don't know if wisdom is being taught in the university. And so people get angry when I say that. But again, it's not about being angry. It's about just saying what is really going on here. And can we measure, like you can measure writing skills, how well you did on a multiple choice, your knowledge of a specific thinker, right? But then are you really measuring wisdom? And I would think that a school of philosophy is supposed to be teaching wisdom. And so I don't believe that the university is actually doing that. And so that's why I'm here, right? Or else we would just be over there learning that stuff, right? And so this book specifically, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, some people will criticize it and say, hey, that's a self-help book. They'll, get a little poop in their pants and they're like, that's not wisdom or that's not philosophy. And I'll say, okay, maybe there is a lot of literature in the self-help industry that is based on pseudoscience, that doesn't make sense, that's not necessarily going to help you with your well-being. But in that act of philosophizing, I would like to think that we can sift through it like you're looking for gold and you're shaking the thing, you're getting the dirt out, and you're like, boom, there's a kernel, right? And sometimes there's like a hot ember and it burns through your screen. It's like it's bad, right? So we want to take those out too, you know? And so this book, I would say, has a lot of wisdom in it, and the way that it's structured, the way he thought about it. There are some things that lack conceptual clarity from an analytic philosophical sense, like certain things aren't defined too well. I think there would be best to have like a principle evaluation mechanism in the beginning. Like identify what principles are, how do we evaluate them, right? And then he could offer some as examples. He doesn't really do that, so it's less philosophical in that sense, but we can do that here, right? And the videos that I've been going through, I've been kind of touching on that as we talk about it. So yeah, so this is in the realm of practical philosophy, I would say. The previous book that we did like a year and a half ago was Feeling Good by David Burns. And this book discusses the philosophy of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'm going to be doing videos on that soon. I'm just trying to find the time for it. And then you guys can join if you like. It's going to be just online, and then I'll post them after. So whatever.
Question. You talk about, you use a term called analytical philosophy.
Yeah.
What's the difference between this and the continental philosophy, the German, the continental?
Yeah.
Just very briefly.
Analytic philosophy looks at the structure of like definitions predominantly, and then they expand from there, and they're very logic based, right? And they're analyzing or their analytic approach to what is philosophical. And so they would say something is not or is philosophical based on that. Whereas continental philosophy is more based on like meaning, in the sense that you don't have to really be too definitive with definitions. You can be more fluid, I guess you could say, or more ambiguous. And then they would be more like metaphysical. So like the logical positivists would be analytic philosophers. And then philosophers like Husserl, talking about phenomenology, would be more in the continental realm, or like even Heidegger, right, is more continental, and Sartre, right. So existentialism falls in that category, and then so Wittgenstein is an analytic philosopher, right. And so I think that it's like Richard Rorty is like a relatively contemporary philosopher. He wrote a book called Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature. And he kind of looks at knowledge as in from a continental and an analytic perspective. He kind of read both, you know? And so Rory's cool. Like I read some Rory. Okay, so today let's go through some of this. So I'm going to share my screen for people.
His background is American.
He's American, yeah.
And this is the last.
Okay, so basically what I do is I go through the book in some ways meticulously, almost statement by statement sometimes, and then we can talk about it and take little breaks as we go through. So we'll see how far we get today. If we get through 20 pages of the book, we're doing pretty good. So maybe up until page 138, 139. So first I'm going to read the slides, and then I'll go through the book. So in this section, focuses on character, what you're being, contributions and achievements, what you're doing, and values or principles that being and doing is based on. So that's what your personal mission statement is supposed to communicate. So you guys, you're kind of just jumping in the middle, so you can just watch the videos on your own time later. We have that for you. So your personal mission statement is going to reflect on your own uniqueness. In some ways, it's a personal constitution analogous to the United States Constitution. So he's writing from that political framework, where the standards and laws are evaluated by it. The president must agree to defend and support this. And then it's a criteria for citizenship. So it's almost a criteria for selfhood, your personal mission statement. For this to be me or be part of my identity, it would have to be something that I always agree with. It's the standard for an individual. So it's the ideal that we're always striving towards, and the basis for life directing and daily decisions in the midst of our emotions and the circumstances affecting our life. And so that's where he talks about a changeless core as we go through the book. And having this changeless core is important for us because just like a stick in the mud, The weather may change, like it might be windy or raining, and the stick may bend a little bit, but it always stays in the same spot. And so it allows flows of change without figuring everything out, stereotyping or categorizing to accommodate reality.
Mhm.
And okay, so I'll go through this first, and then
So we need to set up a constitution for ourselves.
that's what he says. Yeah, personal mission statement. Yeah. So on page 120, so this book, I'll find out where it is.
So I be my own lawmaker.
Yeah, basically, it's right here.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the most effective, so I'm just reading from page 120 on this edition of the book. I would suggest getting this one because it's updated. The most effective way I know to begin with the end in mind is to develop a personal mission statement or philosophy. So this principle or habit, begin with the end in mind, what that means is we want to know our goal first before we start moving in any direction. If we don't know what our goals are, then any kind of effort we put out in the world in some ways won't stack itself towards something. So it's not as effective as it could be. And that's where he's a book about effectiveness, right? And so he wants us to identify what our goals are first, and then we can start putting effort towards those goals. So if it's like being a good mother, having a business, understanding philosophy, being super cool, whatever those things are, right? Participating in an awesome group.
Good question. I like this. But one of the, I think the issues now living in today's world is I found it difficult to find the goal. Because, we live in like a postmodern society, whatever, So let's use my example. So before I came to Canada, I thought, oh, okay, great, democracy is great, so because I come from a non-democracy society. But after I come here, well, there's so many new things. There's identity politics. There's a big gap between what happened in US. There's so many things happening. And then all this kind of theories. Everything can be questioned. So you probably know. We just saw there's a pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel. So I'm kind of like, what is really my goal? So I know setting a goal is super important, but there's so many things, are shaking.
Do you think it's a real democracy here?
You see, that's another thing I'm asking.
I come from Spain, Europe. Before, so later Canada, Quebec, many other countries, France, Germany, and it's one of the questions I don't know. For sure, we're free. But what is? It's another question. It's freedom, but anyway.
I
agree.
Yeah. Europe is another example. I've been to Spain before. So before I thought, this is a part of the West. Everything's great. But then I know Europe is undergoing a lot of their own issues. Spain, Portuguese. They are not as developed as they have they're good social welfare, but they it seems like the income, the business is not doing as well as Germany. So yeah, that's another thing. There's the British exit from the EU. So go at this.
Yes.
The point is, it's a little bit messy for me.
Okay, we can talk about that, right?
Yeah.
In the democracy point, there's like a criteria. I was thought that the UN or a Scandinavian, or maybe it's Switzerland or Scandinavian country that has to evaluate the degree of a democratic state. And we can look through that. I don't have it on me right now, but there is principles or properties we can evaluate a country to determine its degree of democracy or autocracy or.
Etymology is a Greek word. Is the people decide, the power of the people.
Yeah, for the people, by the people.
So this is one of the questions. People, it's very easy to manipulate.
Yes, that is one of the problems.
Well, if it's a kind of matrix, but anyway, I know it's not.
That's okay. This is great. This is good. We'll throw that in the mix, and we can talk about that more soon. Okay, so let's continue here. See what he says. So let's go through this, and then we'll come back to that point. It has to do with your identity fundamentally, your identity and values. That's the short answer, right? Where are our goals? It focuses on what you want to be, your character, and to do contributions and achievements, and on the values or principles upon which being and doing are based. So I'm doing another course right now in personality psychology, and the professor, Dr. Brunette, identifies that personality is not character. And in psychology, they define character as your habits in alignment with your values.
Okay.
And so for someone to be out of character, that means they acted in a way that's contrary or contradictory to what they value, right? So if they don't value like substance abuse, and then they get super drunk and fall down and hurt themselves, you would say you were acting out of character, right?
Mhm.
So it's important to understand. I think that's one definition of character that's useful, right? And so, and the reason that the personal mission statement is important for character is so that you have some basis or standard to evaluate how to act or how to be as situations change over time.
So what's personality then?
Personality would be very good. Would be the way or like a habitual way of acting and behaving across situations and across time in such a manner that you could predict how someone will act based on that personality. Like if you have an accurate evaluation of someone's personality, you could say if they were in this situation, this is what they would do.
But wouldn't like personality be the behaviors as a byproduct of their values and like their character? So it's like you almost can't separate the two, because personality, like if you can predict their behavior, that's because they have certain value systems or ways of seeing the world and behaving that aligns with how they behave, which is then their personality.
Yeah, personality is a larger category, and then character would be within that category. So it would be the reason why they were out of character, whereas character may not answer that question, whereas personality would, right? It's like, for example, temperament or their attachment style, right? Or some trait that they have. Like I'm highly neurotic. It sucks. You know, I get irritated with things. That's my personality. It's like, it sucks. Like when my dog barks, 40% of the time I'll bark back. Stop barking, you know? And so you could predict, you know, depending on my current irritability, like he will be upset if Sophia barks right now, right? And then that would be an example of me acting out of character, because one of my values is like stoicism, you know? So it goes in contrast to my neurotic personality. So
you just say, what's the word? Historic?
Stoicism?
You said you're very stoicism?
That's a value I have.
Oh, okay.
But my personality, if we look at the 5-factor model, I'm high in neuroticism.
Higher neuroticism? What is that?
Neuroticism. Being neurotic.
Neurotic. Neurotic.
Yeah, or emotionally stable is like a way to measure how much irritations will upset a person. Some people are very calm across all situations, whereas other people will become more irritated and have like overt, they'll get upset about stuff. You know?
But do you mean Stoicism is the Zenon was founded by Zenon in Greece? Is a harmony and many things. But I think Marco Aurelius or Epictetus or Seneca is one of good examples. I consider myself as a Stoic man.
Awesome. Teach me, my friend.
Oh, no.
Okay, let's continue. So, all right, so we have character. So in some ways, we're trying to figure out how does this personal mission statement, right, help us be better in our character. And then the second thing would be contributions and achievements, which is like to say goals, right? And then values and principles. Yeah. So because each individual is unique, a personal mission statement will reflect that uniqueness in content and form. So he gives two examples here of two different personal mission statements. So this person just gives like a list: succeed at home, seek and derive merit, or there's being a religious thing here. Never compromise with honesty. Remember the people involved, and he goes through a bunch of things. Don't fear mistakes. Listen twice as much as you speak. So a whole bunch of principles in some ways to follow. That's this person's personal mission statement. The other individual, they kind of have like a paragraph. It's more of a narrative. I will seek to balance career and family as best I can, since both are important to me. My home will be a place where I and my family, friends, and guests find joy, comfort, peace. I value the rights and freedoms and responsibilities of our democratic society. I will always try to keep myself free from addictive and destructive habits. And then she continues. So you can, when you get to the book, you can read through those in a bit more detail and reflect on how that person wrote it and the meaning behind what they said. So,
Question.
Yeah.
So I just get a sense, what he said. It's a very stoic.
Sure.
It's closer to. But in psychology, Freud also talked about deeply about the subconscious part
Okay.
and the super ego and then the whatever. So being this is a very disciplined. What I heard, would that be having some, I don't know, something, maybe the subconscious part will be contained or will be damaged or whatever, because this is very principle. Everything is about, it's a very super ego.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. You're correct.
But all the Freud do is talk about, you need to also care about the subconscious part.
Well, the unconscious, and then there's the id, ego, and superego. And so the id is like your animalistic desires, like drink, sex, eat.
Right, exactly.
Right. And then the superego are the moral codes of society.
Right.
And the ego is the balance between them. How to meet both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So you could say this is a bit of ego in some ways because it's about you, but it also incorporates a little bit of all of them, because it might be about like, it's not, it's the ego isn't as much in there, but it's always kind of part of what we're doing, and then the superego would be the moral code that you're assuming from the social group, norms of the social group.
Right.
So as groups change, the ego would have to change a little bit to meet that, like the needs of the moral code. Some of them we would say are relatively universal, like don't murder people, don't steal, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. So 121. You can call a personal mission statement a personal constitution. It's fundamentally changeless. So that, I think we can talk about. Sometimes maybe we would have to update and change it. I think that's one of those philosophizing moments, is to have some mechanism to evaluate principles. And then what that would be? It would be a higher ordered mechanism though, like critical thinking, right? Like the structure of my thought. And it's important to have that as a tool. And so when we philosophize, that's one of those tools of being philosophical, right? So he gives the example of the United States Constitution. It's a standard that all the laws are evaluated. The president has to defend this when he takes his oath to the office. There could be some criticism to Trump there, whether or not he did that or not. The criterion by which people are admitted into citizenship, the foundation that and the center that enables people to ride through certain traumas and stuff like that. It's the written standard, the key criterion by which everything else is evaluated and directed. Next page. The Constitution has endured and serves its vital function today because it's based on correct principles. So again, self-evident truths that are contained in a different document, the Declaration of Independence. So then you would just say, well, because it can go on ad infinitum, right? If I keep on appealing to another thing, then what is that main core thing? How can I justify what a self-evident truth is, right? And that's something that is a philosophical thing. It can be deductively sound, right? Or it could be an a priori kind of truth. And that is not clear though. He hasn't gone through that. So there's room for philosophizing there, right? Okay. These principles empower the Constitution with a timeless strength through social ambiguity and change. And yeah, so a personal mission statement based on correct principles, again, what is that, right? Becomes the same kind of, so really he's saying that the 7 habits are correct principles, like being proactive. That's like the short answer, right? But I would say there's not only these 7 habits, like there have to be something else in the world, aside from just what Stephen Covey specifically has said, becomes the same kind of standard for an individual. It becomes a personal constitution, the basis for making major life-directing decisions, the basis for making daily decisions in the midst of circumstances and emotions that affect our lives. It empowers individuals with the same timeless strength in the midst of change. People can't live with change if there's not a changeless core inside them. The key to the ability to change is a changeless sense of who you are, what you are about, and what you value. So I think that is important, right? Like, let's assume that we do have some evaluation mechanism. We've determined that this is correct, right? Like Google Maps shows you where to go, and you're like, this is the right way. And then you take it, and then you get there. So I think it is useful. Yeah.
This is very good. Again, it's a very story, but I kind of play the devil's advocacy. Maybe some artist will argue like, "Oh, this is it." As an artist, I need to live a more free. I live a more romanticism. I just need to follow my instincts. I mean, this is a very very principled, oh, I have to get up at 8 o'clock, go to the gym and come back at 12, do something else. I'm more like a machine,
Yeah.
So,
Right.
the artists, I know in Spain, when they dance flamenco, the salsa, they probably will think, what is this? This is too, you know what I'm saying?
Structured.
Too structured.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I agree with you. And that's part of the problem that I have with it. And maybe one of my greatest weaknesses for this. And the next chapter is put first things first, where he actually gives you a methodology to structure your time. Just like once you know your goals, now we have to implement it on like a daily or weekly schedule. And I find it challenging. We can talk when we get there, we'll talk about it, but it's a little difficult for me because I'm like that. My personality is more like an artist in my openness to experience.
Okay.
And but so what I do is instead of and it's not good for my sleep schedule. Like my circadian rhythm is like there's entrainment where you really want to get up when the sun rises because there's like triggers when light hits your eye that it makes you want to wake up. And so sometimes I'll just stay up all night studying, or I'll go to like a party and dance, or I'll play video games, and then now I'm going to sleep at 9, and I'm like, whatever. And so that's not the best. Like some people genetically are more night owls, right? They have genes to stay up late. Whereas other people, they're like early or morning larks. They like to be up early in the morning. And that's fine. You know what I mean?
Sure. But is your goals, or is the goals for the society, your boss, the people around you, are you totally free to decide your own goals in this society?
To a certain degree, no.
Mhm.
Right? We have the social contract. We give up certain freedoms, like the freedom to just go out and just like kill people or just take whatever you want, right?
Uh-huh.
And the justification from the social contract theory is that it's better for all of us if we dispense of certain freedoms, because eventually someone else will do that to you and it's not good for you. So we give up certain things, and we kind of all agree in this society that that's the better way to go. We don't need absolute freedom, we just need like, I think like when we talk about freedom, there's like people dictating how you spend your time or what you do. Like I have a problem with like arranged marriages, for example,
Sure.
or like in Muslim culture, women being forced to wear a hijab, and they would say, we have freedom. And I say, well, why don't you try not wearing it for a day and see what happens? And then usually their social group will have some severe consequences to them, right?
Religion, women, but especially I think we are not, I am an engineer. I am really weird because telecommunication engineer, my real background experience. With this 5G mobile, we are not anymore free because all our life, our privacy, all we think is connected to this phone. Try to live without this, especially new generation.
Yeah.
So it's after this device,
TikTok.
we are not anymore free.
Yeah. No, that's true. And there's people talk about that, like like how technology takes us away from our personal contact. And that's why I like to have the in-person meetings, because
Sure.
we can be with each other
Sure.
and then you're in the presence. It's more human and real in some ways. But also I think it's important to connect with people online. Like it is a tool. We just gotta like learn the place of it,
Especially artificial intelligence
Yeah.
and robotics. This is serious.
That's a very good point, because we hear, I think when Scott Levy do this book, they don't have AI, they don't have internet, they don't have this mobile, they big data, So it's a big challenge, because the big data knows you, and they
All
just
about
keep
you.
pushing things that attract you. I often found, I just suddenly, oh, this is so good. I spent 1 hour looking around, and then, oh, shoot, so how can I follow the principle here?
I feel like perspective. I think everything is just perspective, even just to what we began with the whole wisdom thing. I think it's very subjective and contextual, because like what might be wise to one person might not be wise to another person, and also like cultural differences, which so in one culture maybe being stoic might be seen as being wise, like this person knows how to contain, or that type of thing. But in another culture, being vibrant, being expressive, like that is valued, like that's how people connect with each other. And so being stoic is not seen as like a wise or something thing. And even with the phones, I think Gen Z in some ways has more perspective, I mean, more freedom, because like, for example, even just dating, we're not limited to just like the physical community we're in. We can interact with so many people. We can discover so many new things about the world. The Google Maps, I'm like, oh, I never knew that existed. I can
That's
go
cool.
that way and know how to get there. I can use Uber. I have more physical freedom. So I think it's just perspective. Everything is perspective.
Or balance, right? It's balance within like how we look at it, you know, can be healthy or unhealthy. And some people, I think the property of self-control,
Mhm.
if you don't have control and the phone consumes you, then
Yes.
it's a bad thing.
Uh-huh.
Which is why I use the term tool. Like it's a tool that we can utilize and you can use it for good or it can is the tool in control of you, right? With the cultural perspective, I think it comes down to control again, and if harm is being caused, right? Like there's certain ways of expressing ourselves that if it takes away someone's rights or their freedoms, and we look at different cultural predispositions, I would like to say that there's a way we can evaluate that. And some criticisms would be like, well, it's a Western perspective, and who are you to do that? Well, I would say that there's objective properties that doesn't matter which culture you're from, that can be applied to all cultures. And it's just based on properties of being human. Like we experience pleasure and pain. Or if like you get hit in the head and you get brain damage, now you're not functional anymore, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because so I'm Kenyan originally, and like a big topic of conversation was with the Maasai people. I think when people think of Kenya, they think of like the red, the people with the beads and everything. So like those are people that group of people is a tribe who decided that they want to stay true to their roots. They reject any type of Western thing. So like they like to live in herds, nomadic. They don't send their kids to school. And so that's something that's been, not all of them, but like that's been a conflict because it's like children should have the right to education and you denying them isn't like, but then they're like, but what the wisdom we value is like with the earth, the land, the cows, because that's what we use to survive. And people think that they're poor, but one cow is worth a lot. So those people have a lot of money just in cows. So, and also just young brides like getting married at a young age because that's part of the culture. So that might be seen as unwise. And like I get what you mean with the whole when there's harm, like culture versus
Culture, almost.
That's a very good point.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
I don't know if it's culture versus culture, but I get it. Yeah, in one way it could be seen as that.
That's what some criticisms are. They would say like, I'm Western and I'm speaking from a Western cultural relativism. I'm speaking from a Western perspective and I have no right to impose an evaluation mechanism on another cultural perspective, right? And it is postmodern in its core in some ways, that there is no such thing as objective truth. It's relative to the group and the norms of that group. But, you know, we're all human. And I think that's a liberating thing. And part of being human, and he talked about this too, is like, he uses the term free will, but really it's just that you're a conscious being. And humans, I think we talked about this last time. Yeah, you bring this up last time. Humans as conscious beings, if you try to stifle their ability to be conscious in like a healthy way, right? Which is like, I'm not going out and like eating people or something like that, something crazy, right? Because you're like, I want to experience this. Like, well, there's a huge spectrum of experience here. And so how do we determine what is good experience and what is not good experience? And I think those would be those objective ethical principles, like to not cause harm to others, the Hippocratic Oath, right? And in understanding what those principles are, there's the practice of implementing them in the real world. You can become better at being ethical, right? Now, when it comes to certain cultures, like it's not necessarily the case that every group of people made all the same discoveries, right? And that's part of the great thing about learning and experiencing other cultures is they have like cuisine, for example. Like some foods are like, wow, this is amazing. I've never tried this before. We just don't have that where I come from, right? And so some forms of like semantic knowledge or ways of doing things, certain groups may have discovered it just because of the environment they're from, the pressures that group had on them, and how they adapted and developed. And so I think it's important to say that like, if a individual or a group at a human level wishes to grow and to break away from their culture, we almost have a responsibility to them as a human. But it's different than us like colonizing someone and going in and telling them this is what you must do. There's a difference there, because that's one of the major criticisms of like Western civilization, is that Britain went through the world and just shoved Christianity down everyone's throats and said you must do this, and there was violence and a lot of other bad things that occurred. And so I'm not saying that. It's almost equivalent to saying, like, if there is a tribe or a village or a people that didn't have access to clean water, and then you put a well near there and said, if you want it, it's there for you.
It's good. The diversity is great, especially here in Canada. But at the same time, from the beginning, I think we had the roots is Greek, Romans, Catholic, or Christian roots.
Yeah.
If you somehow lose these roots, you create a different country.
Okay.
So it's at the same time it's balance between accept and protect.
Yeah, yeah,
But be tolerant and embrace diversity.
yeah.
Okay. Something came to mind about like, okay, I'm trying to think of how to word this, but could you say that when if you're trying to look at wisdom objectively, would you say it's acting in a way that's aligned with survival? And survival not just on an individual level, but also like on a societal level, because I think every species needs to survive.
Sure.
So I think with humans, even when you look at culture, it's aligned with survival. So with those cultural norms, it like, even though like what's considered wise might be subjective in those individual situations,
Mhm.
at the roots of it, they're trying to survive. So like,
Yeah.
that would be, like, and it goes with what you're saying about that whole, if like the values go against like someone's safety or all of that.
Okay, so what you're saying, I'm going to summarize what you're saying, so I want you to know that I hear you. You're communicating how these different values or these different ways of being, and within that cultural or social context, they would point, this is the wise way of doing it, and that wisdom is derived from how they developed and grew within their environmental context and their social context. So it's like, don't drink from this river because people get sick. You know, maybe there's like a bunch of herd animals and they shit in the river and then people get sick, right? So they drink from this river, it's okay. So it's wise to drink from one of those rivers, right? It's a way of doing things. And just as a very easy example, when we talk about the individual and survivability, like survivability, there will be ways of doing things that are conducive to environments and to social groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
But part of it is that, like, as a species, as a conscious being or beings that have been able to formulate like semantic knowledge, this is the philosophization point. Like, because one of the major criticisms is like even logic itself is Western, and it's not.
And it's male.
Sure, you can say that too. But if that was
I heard
true,
that argument, right?
if that was true, that would mean that women can't reason, which is super sexist. And that makes me upset. I'm not a woman, but I want to say, yes, you can, right? Maybe women have a bit more of an instinct for emotion, because if they get upset, they can have like a miscarriage, like if they have a lot of tension in their body. So they will be with men that make them feel good so that the baby survives. Like that, there could be something said about that. And so they have like an instinct to sensing emotions or their own feelings better than men do, because men can they don't have babies inside them. And so they can just go in and get themselves killed defending the tribe or trying to take down an ox or something like that, whatever, right? And so because we're conscious and because logic and reasoning is separate, the validity and soundness of our reasoning is different than our experience. You can experience stuff and you can derive information from that. But once it goes into like the language section, you calculate it like a formula. That's basically what it is, right? And all humans or beings, whether it's AI or just humans in general, or some other alien species, or like if dolphins and chimpanzees get to that point, if they can process language at that level, then they can arrive at sound conclusions. That's like one thing, right? And so principles and properties are beyond any specific culture. And it's transferable between cultures. So one group over here can derive some knowledge, and then through language, they can share it with another group, and that group can implement it. right? And so culture, similar to religion, are like ways of being that are, I would say, are almost like art forms. But it's like, it's sometimes it becomes a problem when the art form violates almost universal. And this is, as soon as you say this, like everything was fine if we're sharing food, but as soon as you say that whatever you're doing is wrong, that's when they impose ethical relativism. And they say, how dare you say me beating my kids is inappropriate? Well, well, or that I have the right to hit my partner or wife because that's what my scripture says, or that's what we do where we come from, right?
You say the food, and then you
Yeah.
say beating the kids.
Yeah.
What I don't understand.
We'll come back to that. Just let her go first.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I think as like times change, like what we need to survive also changes.
Mhm.
So maybe back in the day, like with my grandparents' generation, they had many kids because kids would die of illnesses and all of that. But now it doesn't make sense to have that many kids. And then also and it's like still currently, some people have mixed ideas about birth control.
Mhm.
For their own reasons, but in today's context, like survival looks differently. So as time changes, some societies might still hold on to certain values that kind of go against, like,
Very good.
or they're
This is
still
very good.
they're still
Yeah.
evolving. They're still in the process of evolving.
I love that. I think that's a great way to look at it, because it's not, because alternatively, like the cultural relativistic perspective is almost an arrogant stance saying that the way we do it is always true and it will never change internally or externally. You're communicating that like different groups will change and adapt over time. And whatever the factors are, we don't need to identify them. Some groups may be at a certain level of progress than others. And you identified a culture in Kenya. What was it called again? Sorry?
The Maasai.
Maasai.
So I was going to say, like, I was actually going to give with that example. So I think the argument the Maasai have is that they're still able to survive, like taking care of their cows, living the way that they do. So it's like, why do I need to put my kids in this system? But then the other perspective of that is that to survive in today's world, you need to be educated. You
Yeah.
need to know what's going on. So it's like, there's still that perspective.
Yes, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Like one thing could be like, if there is some kind of a virus, like if there's like malaria, for example, or some other thing, or like a COVID that's going to come through and you need to have some education, those older ways of surviving may not be enough. Like there could be something that will make humans extinct. And that's like the big fear with COVID when it hit, right? For however it hit, there's a high probability it did come from some lab. It may have come from, it's just kind of like, it's like, but there's no direct evidence necessarily,
Sure.
but there's a probability that happened.
You're right. Extinguish, like, for example, one apocalypse
Mhm.
with many risks, atomic or nuclear war. We are in with now what is happening now in Ukraine or in Iran, and there's many other things, of a virus or even ourselves.
Mhm.
We are extinguish ourselves because of our knowledge. There's many other possibilities. And this is one right. And other thing is with history and philosophy. You take, for example, Romans, the colonization of Romans, try to mix culturally, try to adapt, or be open mind most of the time. If you take Genghis Khan from Mongolia, no way. They
Yeah.
kill. I come here and I try to. So it's a good example. But now we have a new phenomenon called globalization.
Mhm.
Globalization is all over the world. The same meaning, a powerful people try to dictate our behavior, and all the countries in some years have only one thought.
Okay, so underlying this entire discussion, right, would be, are there, like, human rights is one thing, right? And who determines what those rights would be and what are they based on? I'm going to make the argument or proposition that it's based on the human condition, that as human beings, as animals, we're better off doing things this way. We've tried the experiment of having kings and appealing to scripture and stuff like that, and look where it leads us. So maybe there's a better way, right? Based on how our brains work and our bodies, right? And how we work as a group. And so you got to kind of accept that first, right? Like, what is a human being? You know, and that I think takes some, like, we have to figure that out first. Because once you agree on that, then you can build on it. And so some groups just might not really ask that question, or really know what the answer would be necessarily in a way that makes sense. That's because we're all human.
Okay.
Right? Like, that's the first thing we have to, if you look at our DNA, we're all very, very, very similar, right?
You said as an animal, you think that we are only animal inside, or there is any difference between animals and our human being?
I think we're like super animals. We're like there's something going on with us in the sense that it distinguishes us, but we're definitely mammals for sure.
I think with animals, with feelings, with creativity,
Sure.
with some knowledge, very high knowledge.
Yeah.
But feelings, it could be a high difference.
My dog has feelings. Like, she has nightmares. She gets upset. She cries when I'm not home. She's not just like a robot dog, right? Like, she has emotions, but they're dog emotions. I may not be able to know what they are. Like, Thomas Nagel wrote this paper called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" or whatever. You can't really know what it's like to, like, experience sonar. Like, that's beyond you to some degree, right? But yeah, okay. So going with your point, basically, like, if you accept the cuisine of another culture, you're just accepting that culture, and you're saying, "Oh, this food is good," unless you have like a dietary restriction or whatever, right? But really, cultural relativism, they're not saying that you're not allowed to taste our food, or you can't appreciate our food, or whatever it is, right? Or the way we dance, or whatever it might be. Usually culturalism comes into play whenever you tell them what they're doing is wrong, because they're saying, "How dare you criticize?" They don't criticize. They don't get upset when you say it's right. "Oh, this is great bread." They get mad when you say that this act is wrong, like female genital mutilation, for example.
When they talk about ethics, when it comes to the ethics, right?
Yeah. And then the appeal to, instead of taking the feedback in and having some sense of responsibility and awareness, they just go to a higher order criticism and say ethics in general is flawed. And it's like, really? That's how you're going to try to like, it's a little arrogant in some ways. I think all of us need to be open to criticizing our own culture and the cultures of others. And we need to agree on some standard, which is just being philosophical, of criticizing. Because philosophy is the thing we use to question everything and make sense of everything. And all humans with a certain degree of cognitive capacity, not contingent on their ethnic origin, right? It's based on their brain. Because anybody, if you get hit in the head enough, you're not going to be able to think anymore, right? So some people are born that way. Some people have had trauma, right? Some people's development was affected, and they don't have that same. People use the term IQ, but I use cognitive capacity. And so, yeah. And so what we want to do is, those that do have the capacity to think about things and make sense of stuff, we have a responsibility to all the other humans, right? To make sure that their rights are protected, that they don't suffer unnecessarily, they have access to services and whatever, and they can live good lives to the capacity that they can. And then other species on the planet, right? And then if AI comes around, we got to take care of that too. Because if we don't, it might get pissed off and fucking, there you go. Now you got a new problem, right?
Criticize is a good point, especially for philosophers. Many of them, they died because of criticizing their own society.
Yeah.
Socrates, Seneca, Cicero, many people in China. If you criticize, you think and you criticize, you risk your own life. It's great when you are really courageous to criticize, because it's something to improve, not to the society, not for yourself.
It's for all of us. And that's one of the norms of the Philosophy Society. That's what a wise group is, right? To embrace disagreement in a healthy way. And we want to dispense of, like, in narcissism as a diagnostic disorder, one of the criteria is being arrogant or becoming like aggressive and angry when someone disagrees with you. We don't want that. That's not good. We want to have the norm and the value as a social group of how to disagree with each other and how to make sense of things, right?
Can I ask a question about this?
Yeah.
Because Stephen, basically he said that we should be proactive, right?
Yes.
So I thought about this related to a theory by a German philosopher called Fichte.
Okay.
After Kant, there's a Fichte. He talked about the self.
Mhm.
How do you formulate the self? You have to go out and fight against the non-self,
Sure. Okay.
the self and non-self. Because you just sit here, you kind of think that there's no self. Self is formulated when you collide, when you knock on something,
Mhm.
knock on the nature, knock on the non-self.
Okay.
Then in this process, the self gets created, and it's a never-ending journey.
Okay.
So that's his theory. I don't know. You heard about this?
I haven't. That's cool though. I like that. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. The after Kant, Schelling,
Okay, Schelling, yeah.
Schelling, and then Hegel. So
Cool.
So yeah. So I'm being proactive. It's like a
Yes.
mission.
Number one.
You want to have self, then you have to go outside and collate.
Very good. Okay, let's continue. With the mission statements, we're back on 122 in this edition of the book. With the mission statement, we can flow with changes. We don't need prejudgments or prejudices. We don't need to figure out everything else in life to stereotype and categorize everything and everybody in order to accommodate reality.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Our personal environment is also changing at an ever-increasing pace. Rapid change burns out a large number of people. They can hardly handle it, hardly cope with life. They become reactive and essentially give up, hoping that the things will happen to them will be good. Doesn't have to be that way. So next slide. So I'm just going to read from the slide really quick. So this is a second example. The first one is the U.S. Constitution. This, again, he's going back to Viktor Frankl. Logotherapy, mental and emotional illnesses are symptoms of meaninglessness and emptiness. Helping an individual detect meaning and mission in life was his solution to that. Essence of proactivity is a sense of one's mission, vision and values of directing one's life.
Mhm.
Power of a written constitution based on correct principles. Every decision utilizing the most effective use of time, talents, and energies.
That's great.
So,
Viktor Frankl, he was one of the survivors all this as
Awesome.
the Second World,
Mhm.
and he was all the time. I have to survive because I have a goal in my life. Most of the people in the concentration camp died. Nazi time, and he is now as a psychiatrist, very famous, and it's very good meaning of life.
Man's search for meaning.
So it's very inspiring. But
Inspiring.
let me just want to go deeper. So he suffered a lot in the Auschwitz, and they talk about so everything should have a meaning, right? So what's the meaning of suffering?
Well, he would say that his example would be he would think about teaching his students and explaining what happened to him through that, right? That's how he created meaning out of it.
So basically, he said, you as a human being, you can and you should create a meaning for things.
You should.
For things.
Yep.
He thought about something, but what if I couldn't find the meaning? I cannot just manipulate, right? Like I'm just working. I go to I don't know, just do a 9-to-5 job. How can I create a meaning to it?
Yeah. So part of it, like that's identified within the David Burns stuff, is to rule out cognitive distortions, right? And I think that that's why he's talking about this, having a sense of self, or in some ways that personal constitution, that is the thing that is useful, because then when things happen to you, you can kind of transcend them and you don't attach yourself to the suffering. You don't become the suffering. You're more than that. And then you can transcend the suffering.
I'm sorry, Ron, I have to excuse myself. There's a personal thing I have to do. Thank you so much. This was interesting.
So you're in the group, and then I'll be here next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, let's continue. It doesn't say Viktor Frankl. Okay, yeah. So in the Nazi death camps, he learned the principle of proactivity. So meaning that he chose how to respond to what was happening to him, right? In his attitude and his behaviors. He didn't just allow it to happen passively or be reactive to it. I learned the importance of purpose, meaning in life, the essence of logotherapy, a philosophy he later developed. Mental and emotional illness are really symptoms of an underlying sense of meaninglessness or emptiness. Logotherapy eliminates that emptiness by helping the individual detect their unique meaning and mission in life. So once you have the sense of mission, the essence of your own proactivity, the vision and values that direct your life, basic direction from which you set your long-term and short-term goals. So that's the like that you're connecting your present state with some future state, is what he's trying to say, right? In the goal attainment. Against which the power of a written constitution based on correct principles, against which every decision considering the most effective use of your time, talents, and your energies can be effectively measured. Okay, so next slide. So at the center. So I'm just going to read through it first. Begin your utmost center when writing a mission. Thanks, Natalia, again for the thing. Writing a mission statement using self-awareness. Examine for correct principle maps, making sure they describe the territory or reality. Working at the center of our circle of influence, we expand it. So he calls them 4 life support factors. These are the properties that are in your center. And he talks about different kinds of centers. We're going to get into that. So he wants to argue for a principled center, right, which is based on reality, but other people have other centers of themselves, their identity or their constitution that they base it on. And he says those are incorrect. He gives examples. So these 4 properties are security, which is a sense of worth, your identity, or your self-esteem. Then he talks about guidance, which is your direction in life, your frame of reference, and decision-making within the moment. Then he talks about wisdom, which is he defines it as perspective on life, a sense of balance, understanding as an integrated wholeness. And then power, a faculty or capacity to act, overcome deeply embedded habits, and cultivate higher, more effective ones. Interdependent factors create a balanced center. None are all or nothing. Yeah, I'm not sure you mean that. We'll get to that.
Can I
Is
answer?
it- sorry.
Yeah, please.
It's connected with the Maslow pyramid.
A little bit. He mentions that in the previous chapter.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to kind of reflect it more deeply, and then I have a personal. So I'm still processing the Viktor Frankl because we all know that but as a matter at the first I read it, I said this is great. If he can do it in the altruism, then I should much easier for me to do here. But I found it actually not just me, but a lot of people. We just couldn't find a meaning. So then I kind of wonder why. For example, people will say, okay, Viktor Frankl, you said, the meaning of your suffering is you want to able to, when you go out, you can teach these things, to the people. Then people can say, what's the meaning of teaching this to people? People gonna die anyway. What's the meaning? They keep chasing, they keep asking, they just don't stop there. So what will, because I think there are some, because I also watched some videos by Viktor Frankl, so I think one kind of a challenge is that they say, because Viktor Frankl has a religious belief.
Okay.
He thought about, he think there's a purpose for life.
Okay.
So everything so this is more like a belief. So then it goes back, you go out, you teach those kids, why do you want to teach those kids? Why do you want to make basically they want to ask, because there's a group of people, it's called a nihilism, nothing matters. What do you call that?
Nihilism.
Nihilism, So nihilism will say
there is no meaning.
There's no meaning. Why you want to teach them? Why?
Yeah, well, nihilists in some ways are incorrect. Like nihilism is a response to, it's like this development of the Judeo-Christian sense of morality and ethics. And nihilism is like one of the levels of this development of like a transition from God as the source of meaning to humans and the earth being a source of meaning. So that's like one thing. And you have to dispense of your existing way of seeing things. You have to kind of be at zero, which is nihilism. And then you can build on top of that after. Me and the philosophers, we can discuss that. But so if I hear what you're saying is that people would say, well, with Viktor Frankl, why do you derive meaning from giving other people meaning? Right? And there's probably a psychological reason why for him, and if he's religious, then it could be, some kind of a God thing. God has spoken to him, and that's good. That's a good use of God, sure, right? But in some ways, like Daniel Dennett said, we are meaning-making machines. Humans create meaning out of their experience and their environment. And so what is that meaning? And that's where being philosophical is useful. Like religion in some ways is almost like a cheat code. It's like all the meaning is already made for me. I just got to have this one way of looking at it, and it's super easy. Whereas if we just take a little bit of practice and training, or if you practice this a little bit, like the Philosophy Society or studying philosophy, then you can learn the mechanism to create meaning and not just use a one size fits all, whatever it is, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, depends on the cultural. For example, if you have Seneca, the life is short. So it's one of the two words very, very for me important. Carpe diem.
Yeah.
It's Latin words.
Yeah.
Enjoy this moment.
Yeah.
And,
Seize the day.
Seize the day.
moment,
Yeah.
seize the day.
Seize the
Because one
day.
day, all the people here will die.
Yeah.
It's the reality. It's the only reality.
Yeah.
So we have nothing, and we bring. There's no pharaohs or whatever. We will die. And what is from the beginning to the end?
Yeah.
Those happening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in this
very
time.
good. I love it.
So that's exactly they kind of challenge the Viktor Frankl's idea, because everybody gonna die. Why you care to teach this
Why
thing
you
to the
care?
future? Because those people gonna die anyway.
Sure.
Basically they're asking why you want to make the society better. Because why you want to teach those kids? Because you hopefully your learning from the Auschwitz can benefit the future generation. But then they ask, why you want to benefit? Everybody's gonna die someday. There's an emperor in France says, I don't care when if the flood pouring the country, if I die, or after my death, I don't know, Louis, whatever. So so it goes, yeah, logotherapy is great, but the people gonna ask to the extreme, then at last, what's the meaning?
What's the meaning?
What's the meaning?
It's unsatisfactorily psychological, is that some people are more psychopaths and don't give a shit about others, whereas others have a lot of pro-social compassion, right? And you could say that Jesus is teaching this pro-social compassion, which is good. Okay, sure. Good. That's good. Okay, we'll get that from him. But it might just be psychological, is that he has an instinct for being pro-social. And he has a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion and a lot of love. And that's it. And he's just found that mode is the best way for him to behave and act in a way. And because of that, it derives meaning for him. Other people may have less of that property. They're less empathetic. They're less pro-social. Like there's a study that they did fMRIs on psychopaths and their amygdalas were smaller.
Sure.
Right. So if you just are a psychopath and your amygdala is not that big, you don't have much empathy, then you don't give a shit. Right. Other people are just objects like the table. If I take a chainsaw to the table, it doesn't matter. Take a chainsaw, like in what the hell is it? That movie with Christian Bale, the psychopath movie. He's cutting people, he's dropping chainsaws on people. He's laughing about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because you talk about wisdom, because our theme is about wisdom. And
Sure.
you talk about quality of wisdom is that because there's some law of thoughts, right?
Yes.
So I found that I'll give you an example by Viktor Frankl. This is more persuading to me. He actually in the concentration camp, there's a lot of his what do you call that, prisoners. Also, very depressing.
Yep.
For example. So he gave a speech. He said something like, we all know, 99.9% we're gonna die here. Sure. Because at that time they didn't know, there's somebody when the war was gonna end, So that there's a 0.1%, we'll survive, right? That's just a fact. But nobody can deny that we have that 0.1%, right? Hope. So nobody can deny that. That's also a logical. Only you don't kill yourself. Only you don't commit suicide. You can see whether you belong to that minor percent. So that's the way why you shouldn't suicide. Because if you suicide, then you basically you cannot deny that tiny percent.
The only way to lose that hope is to kill yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you cannot deny even how depressed, how miserable we are. The chance still there, but you have to survive.
Yes.
To see if that chance, apply to you or not, But so I found that's a logically, talk about wisdom. Logically, that makes sense.
That's great.
Right?
Yeah. Very good. Okay, let's continue. Let's get a little bit more content before we get kicked out of here.
Yeah.
If I own the building, we would stay until we're done, but I don't. Someday Natalia's going to help us figure that out. Okay, so at the bottom of 122, a sense of mission, essence of, yeah, can we do that? So 123, at the center, yeah. All right, so in order to write a personal mission statement, we begin at the very center of our circle of influence. So let's go back to the chapter on being proactive. A center composed of our most basic paradigms, the lens in which we see the world. Here, that we deal with our vision and our values, use our endowment of self-awareness to examine our maps. If we value correct principles, to make certain that our maps accurately describe the territory. Our paradigms are based on principles and reality. You can always just share here if you want, Natalia. We use our endowments of conscience as a compass to help us detect our own unique talents and areas of contribution. Use our endowments of imagination to mentally create the end we desire, giving direction and purpose to our beginnings and providing the substance and written personal constitution. So at the center, we have these four properties, right, of our certain, so the place in which we can act and respond, responsibility, right? The environment, everything external to us will impact us, but internally we can respond outwards towards it, whether it's our body, other people, or the physical environment. And the four things we utilize to do that with is wisdom, security, guidance, and power. So what are those things? 124.
No, it's not the same now.
Yeah, sorry, you guys, yeah. Focus efforts to achieve the greatest results. We work within our very center of circle of influence. We expand it. The highest leverage of production capability. So there's the production, and then there's the capacity of the thing to produce. So our capacity to be proactive, our capacity to be responsible is when we increase those properties in our circle of influence, which are those security, guidance, wisdom, and power, significantly impacting the effectiveness of every aspect of our lives. So that's why it's wisdom, right? So whatever is at the center of our life will be the source of our security, guidance, wisdom, and power. Security represents your sense of worth, your identity, emotional anchorage, your self-esteem, basic personal strength or lack of it. So with the David Burns stuff, we can increase that sense of security by removing cognitive distortions, right? Guidance means your source of direction in life, encompassed by your map, internal frame of reference that interprets for you whatever is happening out there. Our standards or principles or implicit criteria that govern moment-to-moment decision-making and doing. Wisdom, so guidance is like how you make decisions in some ways and the way you evaluate that. Wisdom is your perspective on life. So in some ways, wisdom is whether the maps are correct. Sense of balance, your understanding of how various parts and principles apply and relate to each other. So that things that are hanging together that Sellers talked about. Embraces judgment, discernment, and comprehension. A gestalt or oneness and integrated wholeness is wisdom, right? And that's why reasoning is important, because reasoning helps us put things together properly, right? Power is the faculty or capacity to act, the strength and potency to accomplish something. Vital energy to make choices and decisions, includes the capacity to overcome deeply embedded habits and to cultivate higher, more effective ones.
What does it mean?
Power is like your willpower.
Willpower.
And that can be, if you sleep well and you eat healthy, you have low stress, psychologically, you'll have more willpower.
Right.
These four factors, security, guidance, wisdom, and power, are interdependent. Security and clear guidance bring true wisdom, and wisdom brings the spark or catalyst to release and direct power. When these four factors are present together, harmonized and enlivened by each other, they create a great force of a noble personality, a balanced character, and a beautifully integrated individual. So that's nice.
That's nice.
All right, okay, you're selling me in here a little bit. That's good, okay. Life support factors undergird every other dimension of life. None of them is an all or nothing matter. The degree to which you have developed, each one could be charted somewhere on a continuum, much like the maturity continuum described earlier. So that's what he means by it's not all or nothing, these four factors. At the bottom end, four factors are weak. You're dependent on circumstances or other people, things over which you have no direct control. At the top end, you are in control. It's in your circle of influence, right? You can be proactive. You're not being reactive. Independent strength and the foundation for rich interdependent relationships. Security lies somewhere on the continuum between extreme insecurity on one end, where your life is buffed by all the fickle forces that play upon it, and a deep sense of high intrinsic worth and personal security on the other end. Your guidance, page 125, ranges on the continuum from dependence on the social mirror or other unstable fluctuating sources to a strong inner direction. Your wisdom falls somewhere between a total inaccurate map where everything is distorted and nothing seems to fit, and a complete inaccurate map of life wherein all the parts and principles are properly related to each other. That's important. One of the properties of the tool of philosophy of science, Kuhn's criteria of adequacy, is coherence, whether things fit together properly.